Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good day to wherever you are. Um, my name is Mike Violette, and I'm joined by my IT superstars, Mike Urban, Christina Karhoff, and Neil O'Connor. And we want to talk about this subject of cybersecurity for product compliance. And honestly, it's a little bit nebulous at this point. There are advanced models for network systems and so forth, but this is an area that continues to gain perspective in the world of product certification. So without further ado, I'd like to begin the webinar, and I guess my comms are okay. And this is really more of an information sharing and exchange kind of event, and really welcome anybody's comments on their own understanding and perspective on what this topic means for their operations and for their product development. Oh, come on. So briefly, our overview of Washington Labs and ACB, we've been doing this for quite a number of decades, and we deal across commercial, consumer, defense, aerospace, energy, and more wireless certifications and the Internet of Things, which is why it's so critical for there's some consideration, because we're all so connected, and there are bad guys and bad actors that are trying to hack. We know that's a common occurrence, and it's a common knowledge across the consumer space and across the industry space. And so that's what we're trying to address today. We are monitoring the chats. And so if anybody has anything to push into our chat tool that we are going to respond to. We also have a number of questions that we've put together that we really look for your expertise in how you're dealing with some of these different aspects. So again, we've been in the development of devices for many decades, and we've done some interesting stuff and across industries, aerospace, defense, vehicles, energy, nuclear power, and so forth. So I won't go much into that, but that's our commercial. Then we're going to get dispatched with the commercial and move on to the presentation. So we're looking at some of the drivers for cyber regulations. The government obviously is looking at this, US Fed Gov, Canada Gov, different state actors. And some of the things that are developing out of NIST is the cybersecurity maturity model compliance. And I think it's up to version 2.0, and it's being promulgated across the Fed side. So that is critical if you're doing work with the federal government. But if your business model is mixed, then you have to consider what the consumer space looks like. And we look at both of these aspects, and that's what this presentation is about. There are directives in the EU that are required for consumer products, and this is evolving. And in August of 2025, there's going to be they'll be collected under what's called the Radio Equipment Directive, and it has a lot to do with the cyber resiliency and consumer protections. So we are deeply concerned about that because of the number of mobile devices and wireless devices that we work with on a daily basis. And we are keen to understand that stuff and protect our customers and make sure that their products meet those requirements, not just from a regulatory point of view, but from a true consumer protections point of view. And we've been thinking long and hard about this, and my team helped to put this presentation together. Again, my IT superstars. So they're on the call here, and we'll ask them to supplement any of my comments as we're going forward. A private sector, you have contractual issues, may or may not be federal government, but there's more and more of these security protections that are going into requirements for electronic devices. We have several customers that are asking about that and making sure that data protection, data security is a meaningful part of our operation. So again, it's evolving, but it's on a straight course to some maturity as the product regulations change. International requirements, I mentioned the European Union briefly, and of course there's other of our trading partners that are concerned about that, including Asia and including North America, South America. So it's really quite a widespread scheme that is slowly maturing. And we're keen to understand that. And again, this is information sharing session. So, if you've got chats, please, throw in at any time, and we'll deal with those questions as we're able to. So what are some of the basic requirements an organization should consider? Well, as I mentioned, the government and the state actors and research conducted by Consumer Reports indicated that more than half of customer surveys were concerned about the information collected by connected devices. And they're all over the place, from your Bluetooth enabled refrigerator and appliance to your Wi-Fi networks. And there are active agents, I would say, that are looking to absorb, collect, and compromise your personal information. And there's across the globe, obviously, U.S. governments and state actors are concerned about that, to make sure that their data networks are protected and consumers have sufficient protections from hacking and from data collection. So this is really at the core issue that is born out of our interconnected lives. So over the last few decades, I can state that the product testing and certification is really quite globalized, harmonized. Different types of devices need to meet certain standards, and most of those standards do have a common base. And those originally were enacted for electromagnetic interference protections from devices and radio networks, but now it's gotten a whole level more complicated as our wireless devices and our communication schemes continue to expand into the spectrum. So there's a notice of proposed rulemaking that has come out from the Federal Communications Commission, and it's evolving as well. I understand there was a FAQ draft that came out in the last 2 weeks or so, and they're concerned about a cyber labeling voluntary program at the moment. Probably we become mandatory, that shows some confidence for consumer devices that when you plug something in or don't plug it in, that your devices have a certain level of cyber protection. And we're actively monitoring that. The FCC is busy with that, and an organization called the TCB Council, which is a private sector body that deals with interface with the FCC. They are having some cyber protection discussions next week in Baltimore. So we're eager to find out, and we're keen to understand more and more about what direction that's going. So it's all future speak. As I mentioned before, European requirements are emerging. The Radio Equipment Directive, the Cyber Resiliency Act is again centered around the protections for consumer data protections. So we deal with this stuff, electromagnetic compatibility. These are kind of motherhood things. We deal with product safety, environmental. There's different types of environmental requirements. Some have to do with product performability, and some other the environmental stuff have to do with keeping noxious things out of the waste stream, that can pollute the environment. So we're concerned about radio efficiency and security. Again, the Radio Equipment Directive is a core part of our activities. So now the cybersecurity protections are evolving. And this is really what this session's about, is to try to find out what the industry direction is going, and to what level of competency and understanding there might be a cross product development and design. So at the top of the pecking order, so to speak, in the cybersecurity area is the National Institute of Science and Technology, and they've been around for longer than I've been alive. But they deal with standards, and they have this CMMC requirement that is being enacted across the U.S. federal government side. Again, not so much on the consumer side. That has a different flavor. But NIST is the standards bearer for the United States, and they do excellent work in Gaithersburg and in other branches, and they're really driving this particular effort to protect federal government requirements and contracts. And so if you're in that space, you have to be aware of this and make sure that you're taking it into account when you are working for the FedGov side. As I mentioned, standard setting. These are some kind of antiquated pictures of 1 ohm and 10 milliohms. So standards, electrical standards, as well as non-electrical and also security protections are part of NIST's domain. And there's so much more to that. There's international agreements, mutual recognition arrangements that the FCC and the NIST gets involved with, the Department of Commerce, other different divisions of the international trade interests in DC area. And they have enacted mutual recognition arrangements so that when you test something in one economy, that you can legally put it on the markets in other areas. So a lot of work has gone into that, a lot of hard work, a lot of considerations. And so under that umbrella, the cybersecurity stuff is slowly being absorbed. Maybe that's the wrong word for it, but it's being complemented by these different trade arrangements. And that's a whole other subject, but just recognize that the international market is becoming more harmonized, and that has brought a lot of benefits to consumer, non-consumer products. So you can plug in your charger anywhere you want in the world, and it's not going to fry, or it's going to work correctly. And that's just one of the smaller instances, but there's a whole other pantheon of regulations that are protecting our wireless spectrum, and our security is coming. So NIST is the national timekeeper. They have a very precise clock somewhere, and maybe it's in Boulder. And so that is really the heartbeat of a lot of our international communications, because GPS requires this precise timekeeping. Wireless networks require this precise timekeeping. But back to the cyber layers definition, you've got different mixes of these things. The senior executive level, they have to be focused on organizational risks and protections. And we go all the way down, to making sure that there are it's really a systematic thing where the different branches of any organization has to be considered or concerned with what their role is in the cybersecurity protections. It's all about risk management. And so the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Compliance, that's a mouthful. It started a few years ago. It's been in the work for decades, probably across the Fed government. And it protects controlled and uncontrolled information. What does that mean? So if you have a secret or TS level, that's controlled information. But there are different levels of information that have different risks associated with them. And so we're concerned about the entire spectrum of these things. So There's uncontrolled sensitive information, trade secrets, for example, not Fed Gov stuff or Defense Department things, but it's an estimate, and I don't know where this number came from. I Googled it, that adversaries steal about $60 billion a year based on either financial information that gets compromised or not, or trade secrets that get promulgated across different industries, across some of our friends and some of our not so friends. So there's different levels. Basic cyber hygiene, you've got to have strong passwords, for example, protection requiring additional controls. And so this particular NIST document covers some of these things, again, at the Fed Gov level, but it moves down across the whole industry. And federal government contractors and private sector, have to be proactive about making sure that these security protections are enacted well. And there's an additional 30 extra controls, including auditing and reviews. And one of our interests, and maybe some of our friends from our accreditation bodies are on this call, but what does the accreditation scheme look like for cybersecurity? And we've had multiple discussions with our friends there, and seeing how we enact that particular protections in the accreditation scheme. So we're accredited by under 17025 and 17065 for testing and for certification. It's evolved over time, but we're trying to figure out how to put the square peg in a round hole. And we're looking forward to more engagement on that, because it's going to be part of our daily life. So the cybersecurity framework, it's been around for, again, a couple of decades. It's a voluntary framework, and there's probably will be, I'm guessing, mandatory at some level for consumer equipment. And just to have a perspective on that is that the FCC in particular, has moved from, voluntary requirements back in the 80s to having certification requirements and accreditation again under that whole umbrella. And so I can't imagine that it's not going to be mandatory in some way or form. And it'll either be industry driven or it may be regulatory driven. So this includes high level guidance, common language, systematic methodology. We're all about standards in our business. So everybody speaks the same contorted language sometimes, but everybody agrees that some base level of protections are necessary, and you have to follow whatever those standards might be. And so again, an evolving thing. So there's 5 components to cyber protection. This is a kind of a high level thing, and there is much more depth than we could get into, but this is again an information exchange. So there's 5 components. Oh, there's one more. Identifying if there's a risk, protecting against that risk, detecting that risk. How do you measure that? Because we're measurement guys. And then how do you respond and recover from that? Whether it be a hack or whether it be a more physical attack, which is more and more predominant in our highly connected world. So that's under the NIST cybersecurity framework. And these are, again, really broad requirements, but you have to start somewhere, and then you move down into the specifics of how to particularly implement this stuff. And it's a systematic thing that you have to have in your organization, or you'll have no protections. And so we deal with this a lot, and particularly with our quality system and accreditation models, where we have to put all these things down on paper and then come up with procedures to make sure that we incorporate all these elements. So the Europe ETSI EN 303645 European Telecommunication Standards Institute is the European Union organization that writes standards and adopts them across the EU. And in my lifetime, it's been a real opening of markets because, again, the standards are fixed by agreement and discussion. And my father used to say, cuss and discuss these things. And so now you can apply these standards and have a fair amount of confidence that your device is going to function correctly across whatever networks they are, whether they're connected or non-connected. So this is a real summary of the this TS 103645. Consumer protections, implementation, password management, means of assessing vulnerabilities, software updates, download your software updates, and all these other items, these 13 items that are in this particular document. And so it's a real good framework for implementing a system, whether you're doing it for your own protection or whether you're doing it as a contractual requirement, either under a private sector or under a public sector means. So high level stuff, there's consumer IoT, connected children's toys, baby monitors, everything is how many wireless things do you have in your house and how many vulnerabilities does that create? A lot. And so it's not just the device manufacturers, but it's also consumer information and how to manage these types of particular vulnerabilities. So further list, smart cameras, wearable health trackers, the quote unquote Fitbit thing where you could find out where the Defense Department guys were running, and the bad guys, whatever the adversaries, could figure out what kind of troop movements were happening because they could hack into these wearable device and fitness trackers. Of course, we have our refrigerators and our TVs and everything else. And so under the Cyber Resiliency Act that's coming into force in the next year and a half or so in Europe, it's being evolved, but you have this Article 3 under the Radio Equipment Directive, and there's certain compatibility categories and classes that they comply with the following essential requirements. And there's a subset A through C, which is intercompatibility, functionality provisions. And at this point, it's being slowly adopted. There is kind of a moving target on when it will actually be implemented, and I could be corrected on that. But it's folks are still trying to figure out what that means and how to implement that. And so the Commission, I'm just talking about Europe here, the European Union is still kind of batting that around to find out what the essential protections are and how to implement and enforce those things. So basic elements is in the this Protection Act, again, similar stuff, software integrity, personal data protections. We all can understand the criticality of that. So what's the society's, our electronic society level of awareness of cyber risk? Yes, no, maybe so. We have to study it, we have to understand it, and we have to implement strong protections in order to make sure that our data are secure and our devices are secure. And there's a whole bunch of list here on these other bullet points, which I won't elucidate on, but you can read that here. And if you get the recording, you can watch this many, many times and then send us comments. So I have a few questions for our IT team. And this will be part of our requirements. So on the US side, and I'm going to ask Mr. O'Connor to talk about this stuff. On the government side, the US Fed Gov, what particular things have been enacted to improve the cybersecurity? You're never going to be bulletproof, but how do you improve those things? And Neil, if you could unmute, and if you would like to espouse on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. The first thing to look at for the US right now is there was a executive order that came out in 2021 that was focused on cybersecurity for our country. And that emphasized the software supply chain, but they were talking heavily to federal agencies with this messaging. They do cover some cybersecurity for the consumer level IoT, but in addition to that, the Department of Defense has kind of come up with their own enhanced version, and that was the cybersecurity maturity model, the CMMC.
Right.
Um, and they're working with both the U.S. government and Department of Defense are working very closely with NIST to just build on frameworks to things that already exist as they try and tighten up security everywhere.
How is that progress going? And are there mandates yet, or is it still kind of voluntary, or is it kind of contractually determined?
Um, on the consumer level, things are voluntary at best at the moment. That is the tier that is moving along the slowest, but is probably the least critical as far as the U.S. government is concerned. So we are still waiting for more exact dates and standards relating for consumer products. But at a federal level, an industrial level, a healthcare level, all those things do have um, fully mature security standards that can be found on the NIST website. You'll probably need to search for specific things for your industry or for your product type. But they do have a pretty comprehensive family of products there.
Well, we're seeing the FCC moving in this direction. It's a voluntary program for the cyber lab stuff, and as I understand it, there's different levels of protection and implementation, and it's an active discussion. And at the TCB Council training next week, I predict that there will be a lively discussion about the cyber labs. So ultimately, Neil, I think it's going to be mandatory cyber labeling and making sure things are at least have a basic level of protection. But that's just my guess.
I would agree with that. There's no hard date set up in the US now, but the fact that we're moving towards a voluntary program would indicate that that will at some point become a mandatory set of standards. And just looking over at the EU, they've been passing more strict um, cyber security type acts. They already have a cybersecurity act. They're moving to a cyber resiliency act, and those are far more encompassing than the current FCC guidelines. As I think was pointed out in one of our comments, the Cyber Resiliency Act is a very broad, or has a very broad set of things it covers. It'll be software, hardware, anything with a digital element. So it certainly looks like that's the direction the world will be headed at some point.
It has to, it's an additional burden for device manufacturers, but it's as necessary protection, just like the FCC and the EU requirements for EMC were, people hated it when they had to do it. And I'll just share a comment. Is we've done a lot of EMC directive stuff in our lab, and one of the customers said, Mike, I hated coming here because you're costly and you're painful. And then he came back like 18 months later, 2 years later, I can't remember. And he said, Mike, we've had less field returns since we've been doing this kind of testing and proving things out. Things are not breaking. And I think that's ultimately the same kind of mode or model for this cyber protections. Things are better designed.
Yeah, it certainly will be painful on the side of companies, manufacturers who need to kind of meet new regulations. But overall, the push from the public, the push from governments, it's something that just needs to happen. And hopefully overall will be, cost saving as a society, as we're able to patch up vulnerabilities and just make the public more aware of threats that, we are all facing.
Well, one of this previous slide we put together is talking about, getting $60 billion a year, something like that, is getting stolen, in certain ways. And here's this NIST 8259 series. Do you have any more information on that?
Off the top of my head, it's not one of the ones I've focused on. We here at ACB tend to focus more on consumer level products,
Yeah,
but there definitely are much more defined standards out for the manufacturing level, just due to the risks that they face. There's a lot more money to be made or a lot more money to be lost when you can attack a whole industry.
sure. That's a daily event anymore. Some of these other questions are specific, and I suggest we're coming up to the 30-minute mark or so, and I think we're going to share this presentation and these Q&As with the attendees, and you can probably figure that it'll take a couple of days for us to process the recording. I do have a couple of chats here, and I'm eager to find out what folks are saying.
Yeah, I did see one question pointing to a specific certification, the IEC 62443. I'm not particularly familiar with that standard. Just a quick Google search lets me know is for it looked like control level manufacturing. So, I do think if you already have that certification in your company, or you are probably very prepared for what's upcoming in the cybersecurity world. A lot of the evolving fields right now are for consumer products and Internet of Things, and the level of security requirements for those are much more basic than what would be needed at an industrial automation level.
Sure. Well, there's so many more devices at the consumer level. I got a couple of chats here from Mr. Lau. Read cybersecurity requirements. I think we broadly covered that. Mr. Rieger, the understanding that UK has cybersecurity requirements now because it's not aligned with the EU since Brexit. I don't know what that regulation is, frankly. We can explore that.
My comment on that is I'm sure it would be very similar to the ETSI EN 303645. I do know that the UK, now it's broken off and it is doing its own thing, but
Yep.
I do think there's still a decent amount of back and forth when they're trying to come up with these things, because ultimately everyone's going to have some level of harmonized standard. You're going to want to sell your products in more than one country.
Well, I know that after Brexit, is the UK authorities wanted to write their own standards. This was a few years ago, and they go, never mind, we'll just adopt the EU regs, because what's the point? You don't need to customize all that stuff. There's another Mr. Sweeney. Let's see, 303-645 TS 103-701. They give a manufacturer to give a justification in their ICS for each of the recommendations that they did not do. And then his comment is, the lab shall check whether a justification is given under this 5.01 4.1. It does not require it to be a good justification. It just has to be covered. And I think that's an excellent point. And a lot of this, particular on the EU and more in the United States and Canada, is that a lot of it is self-declaration in a sense. So you don't have to go to a notified body in Europe to make sure that you've done the thing. You may elect to, and that basically depends on your device risk and what your company culture is. That's an excellent point. The requirements, Mr. Macon said, requirements I've seen so far focus on consumer products. Is there any discussion on enterprise level products and systems? That's an excellent point. And it's evolving, particularly with these large cloud-based services. And I believe that most of the requirements are at a corporate level because they have to have their own security. But that's at the enterprise level, and that's just my wag at that. I see some other questions here. Thank you very much. FYI from EU, the CRA applies not just to consumer devices, but as well industrial devices. Good point. Very good. Thank you. For an IoT standpoint, as a component product developer being certified under IEC 62443, a good starting point for manufacturers? I don't know. I haven't seen that standard. Neil, does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I tried to answer that a little bit earlier. I'm not super familiar with it. I just Googled it and saw that it was for industrial level automation. And I am certain if you're meeting those requirements, that's going to cover the consumer level, at least for now.
Yeah.
All these new consumer level standards are just trying to get a baseline of security. They're not trying to go so far over the top. I'm sure they'd like to strengthen them, but for now, they're just focusing on base level security.
It's really part of the new game anyway, and it's evolving, and that's just the way things happen. You can't, how do you eat an elephant? One spoon at a time, and that's kind of what I think the basis is. Product supply chain. Another gentleman said something. Cybersecurity in the product supply chain. It's probably, I'm gonna guess it's part of the whole thing, and the FCC Cyber Labs cyber labeling kind of addresses the supply chain, because in order to give good information to consumers, their proposal, as it's evolving, looks at really the supply chain and labeling and product launch, and making sure that the consumers know that something has been done. And
Yeah, and
kind of the state
I
of
just wanted to butt in on that one. Part of for the U.S., the executive order for cybersecurity specifically covered software supply chain. So I do know that will be a target for regulation. I think at the moment NIST has something called the Cybersecurity Framework, and they just came out with version 2.
Right.
It's a very adaptable system that's more aimed at your company's cybersecurity, but they do have a section of that is focused on suppliers, because a lot of the customer base for this cybersecurity framework are federal level supplier companies or federal agencies who are trying to ensure they have a supply chain that they can verify and do their work.
Sure. It's so critical because we're so interlinked, and the supply chain issues have come up, since post-COVID or even pre-COVID, but that has to be addressed too. I don't have any further comments. I think we've seen all the chats, unless I missed one. Maybe my team saw something I did. And if that's the case, then I want to thank you all for joining. And you can send any questions to info@wll.com. We'll do our best to address that. Thanks to my IT superstars for helping out on this particular webinar, and hope it's useful.
Thank you all for coming.
Goodbye, good night, good day, wherever you are.